Alright, kid. You ready for an adventure?
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in The Mandalorian, Chapter 18, The Mines of Mandalore. The ending of this episode was huge, and it gives us a big hint about the really big story that Jon Favreau is telling with this series. So, I'm going to explain what this ending means, all the Easter eggs, and the rich backstory behind Mandalore that might have left some of you a little bit confused.
Let me take you away from your confusion.
You know, I think my favorite part of this show is when Grogu eats stuff, you know, like frogs, frog eggs, macaroons. He's always hungry.
Yeah, he really is. Now you're making me hungry, though.
Person, did you just upend a can of Quaker Oats right into your mouth?
I made a bad choice. Yeah, I did. It's not a good thing.
You gotta stop doing this, okay, buddy? Like, people don't want to see that. Start eating better, or I'm gonna have to let you go.
Okay. Back to what I was saying.
Anyways, what's going on? Why is this planet all wrecked and stuff?
Okay, now they cover most of this in the recap and in the episode, and we've also talked about the history of Mandalore in our Mandalorian recap video. But I'm going to go over everything very quickly, skip to the next chapter if you already know everything about the history of Mandalore. Thousands of years ago, people settled on a planet called Mandalore that was filled with giant monsters called the Mythosaur, and that's the beast that we see at the end of this episode. The early Mandalorians learned to ride these Mythosaurs.
Your ancestors rode the great Mythosaur.
The Mandalorians were a warlike people who fought one another, but were originally united by a great leader called Mandalore the Great. That was about 10,000 years ago. Then they fell back into civil war for a long time, and then they were unified once again by Tarre Vizsla, wielder of the darksaber. And this is why the darksaber is a symbol of Mandalorian rule. But after Tarre Vizsla died, the Mandalorians fought civil wars for several hundred more years until they finally chose a pacifist government. The non-pacifist group called Death Watch was exiled to Mandalore's moon, Concordia. Bo-Katan, you remember her from this episode, is a member of Death Watch, while her sister, Satine, ruled Mandalore as a pacifist state. The Clone Wars happen, Death Watch and Darth Maul conquer Mandalore, Bo-Katan teams up with Ahsoka Tano to reclaim it, and like Bo-Katan says,
I once ruled here for a brief time.
Because the Empire forced her out when they took over the planet. Years later, she's given the darksaber by another Mandalorian, and she leads her people against the Empire, and then this happens.
If you like pina coladas,
scattering Mandalorians across the galaxy, with Bo-Katan losing the saber to Moff Gideon, which is all the backstory before this show begins. There's a bit more to it than that, but we'll cover more lore as we go along.
What is that? That people food smells amazing.
Oh, this? Why, this is a peanut Buddha bowl with cilantro quinoa, gochugaru spiced peanuts, and sesame broccoli.
Wow, how'd you learn how to make that?
Oh god, I didn't make this. I hate cooking. And this isn't takeout either. This is a nutritious, delicious, ready-to-eat meal by Factor. They're the sponsor of this video. Factor is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. They're a meal delivery service with menus that are updated weekly with more than 34 chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals. I can choose my favorite meals or let Factor surprise me based on my preferences. Guys, I love Factor. They cut out meal planning and prep. Meals arrive pre-prepared and can be heated in the oven or microwaved in just minutes. Plus, they are delivered fresh, never frozen, right to my front door. I have so many days where I forget to eat just because I'm so busy, and then I get tired, I get cranky, and I end up eating granola bars or raw Quaker Oats right out of the can. But Factor's chef-prepared meals make it easy for me to eat healthy.
But however can they make such healthy foods?
Well, Doug, I'm glad you asked. It's because they have registered dietitians who work hand in hand with the chefs in their kitchen. So every meal is made from scratch with nutritious ingredients. You can easily adjust your order size, order more for your family, or even skip a week if you're leaving town. Plus, it is way cheaper than takeout. So you have to give Factor a try. Head to factor75.com and use my promo code ScreenCrush50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Now back to the Easter eggs. The Armorer's previous monologue is from an episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I've said it many times, but it was really silly to have Din and Grogu reunite on that show. Just saying.
Why would you do that?
Anyways, her dialogue is key.
Songs of eons past foretold of the Mythosaur rising up to herald a new age of Mandalore.
Now, we talked about this last week, but the Mandalorian seems to be moving away from the Western and samurai influences of Season 1 and 2, and now expanding into a story which is a full-on biblical epic.
Ooh, actually, that's a really good band name.
Yes, it is. High five. Chapter 17 was titled The Apostate, which is a person who has left or been exiled from a religious community.
I beg you for your forgiveness. How can I atone?
Leave, apostate.
It begins with the baptism of a child, and this episode ends with a baptism. And the stone tablet that Din has contains a passage from the Book of Exodus.
Wait, what's the Book of Exodus? What's that?
Okay, very brief summary of the Book of Exodus. The Jews were enslaved in Egypt. Moses was the chosen one who God appointed to lead them out of slavery and lead them into their new home. There's a lot more to it than that, but for the purpose of this episode, that's all you gotta know. So all of this comes together in this episode. There's a prophecy of the Mythosaur rising from the waters, and here we see that the Mythosaur still exists. The real question for the series is, who's going to be the Moses figure for Mandalore? The armorer says,
Bo-Katan is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess.
See, the darksaber works like the Elder Wand in Harry Potter. You can only win it by taking it in combat. Bo-Katan did not come by it honest. In the canon, we have seen Pre-Vizsla had it in the Clone Wars.
This lightsaber was stolen from your Jedi temple by my ancestors during the fall of the Old Republic.
Then Darth Maul won it from Pre-Vizsla, and then he left it in a temple in Dathomir. There it was found by Sabine Wren, who just sort of claimed it for herself and eventually gave it to Bo-Katan. Now, because Bo-Katan did not win the saber, she failed to unite the Mandalorians under her rule, because groups like the Children of the Watch do not recognize its legitimacy if it's not won in combat. Now, I gotta point out here that the rules about the darksaber are a little funny. Obi-Wan beat Pre-Vizsla in combat, but for some reason didn't win the darksaber. Ahsoka Tano beat Maul, but she also didn't win the saber, I guess because Maul wasn't using the saber at the time. And then in Rebels, Obi-Wan finally beat Maul and killed him, but he didn't win the saber. Moff Gideon did beat Bo-Katan, and then Din beat Moff Gideon, but since Bo-Katan never should have had the saber in the first place, I mean, I think that means that nobody won it, right? Technically, the only person who beat somebody in combat while they were using the darksaber was Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan killed Darth Maul. It's very confusing.
Well, see... Actually, that one always confused me too.
So, this is all really complex, and really can only be decided if Din and Bo-Katan fight each other for the saber. But odds are that one of these two will end up being the Moses of Mandalore.
Oh, that's a good band name too.
Are you starting a band or something?
I've been practicing bass.
Okay, alright. So we're kind of looking at a Game of Thrones Season 7 situation here, with like an intelligent, capable woman of noble birth who wants to lead, but other factions favor the charismatic outsider who doesn't want to lead.
I don't want it. Come on, just take it.
And then we go back to Tatooine.
What's wrong with Tatooine? All the best sunset shots are in Tatooine.
Where the f is Ben?
Alright, look, either Tatooine is a shithole where nothing happens, or it's not. It is the most visited live-action Star Wars planet. The entire Book of Boba Fett was set there. The Mandalorian now has returned there in 6 episodes. I want to see new planets.
Remember Tatooine? Remember the torture droid? Hi, Nimby!
But it is always nice to see Peli. In case you didn't see the Book of Boba Fett, Peli sold Din his Naboo N1 starfighter in that series, and Tatooine is where we get a lot of this episode's funnest Easter eggs. We arrive on Boonta Eve, a holiday that we saw in The Phantom Menace. The pod race was to commemorate that holiday.
There's a big race tomorrow on Boonta Eve.
Now, various canon and non-canon books have described Boonta Eve as a holiday that celebrates Boonta the Hutt ascending to godhood. Now, Boonta was basically a badass Hutt who came to be worshipped as a god, and so all of the worlds controlled by the Hutts hold this festival in his honor. In The Phantom Menace, it was celebrated with a pod race, and in Mos Eisley with fireworks. Peli, played by the great Amy Sedaris, rocking Sigourney Weaver 80s hair, is haggling with a Rodian. Now, even though he's wearing fancy robes, he's not a magistrate like Grief Karga, just a wealthy customer.
That's high magistrate Karga to you.
This actually does a lot to show how Tatooine has been turned around under Boba Fett, as we see the regular people of Mos Eisley are dressing a little tonier. This is a recurring theme in westerns that we see repeated in Navarro. The hero settles the towns of the frontier, and then they gradually become so prosperous that the hero no longer belongs there. They're arguing over the repair price of a speeder, and this thing was driving me nuts. I could have sworn that I saw this before. I looked through every classification of speeder that we have seen on screen, and the best that I can come up with is that it's similar to the RGC-18 that we see a lot in Rebels, although the engines are in the rear and not on the side. It could also be a Sunrunner, a Tatooine militia speeder that is in the Star Wars RPG, but we have actually no idea what that one looks like. Anyways, even the fact that this guy owns a sports car shows how this community is doing better. I mean, compare this to the rickety vehicles we saw in A New Hope. In the background, of course, we see Peli's pit droids that were originally appearing in The Phantom Menace, a Gonk power droid, and a WED-1577 Treadwell repair droid like we first saw at the Lars homestead outside the Jawa Sandcrawler.
Oh, don't forget there's also a BD droid like BD-1 from Jedi Fallen Order.
Hey, BD-1.
Peli is running a scam on the guy where the Jawas steal his parts and she sells them back to him. And we saw a Jawa running a similar scam on Obi-Wan in that show's first episode.
Tika,
If you're going to steal my parts and then sell them back to me, could you at least clean them first?
But I guess the real Easter egg of this episode is R5-D4. So I'm going to explain this little guy in full and then tell you why this was actually my least favorite part of this chapter. So the first time we saw this droid was in A New Hope when Owen tried to buy him instead of R2-D2.
This R2 unit has a bad motivator, look!
The great Peter David wrote a really funny and now non-canon comic book about R5, detailing how he was a Force-sensitive droid called Skippy the Jedi droid who willingly sacrificed himself so R2 could go with Leia and save the galaxy. But the book from a certain point of view basically made this story canon, with R5 sacrificing himself for the importance of R2's mission. And actually, R5 has been on Tatooine for a very long time. This is him in Attack of the Clones almost 30 years before this episode takes place. Now, R5 was included as a background Easter egg in Season 1 of The Mandalorian, which I missed, and I'm still bitter that I missed that one. Dave Filoni had a practical reason for including him in the cantina.
So can you repaint this thing to look like R5? And he's like, yeah, sure, why? And I was like, because I don't think he ever got off Tatooine.
No. And in the BTS, we even see him asking the crew to paint damage on him where his motivator blue.
Gunk that up and let it kind of come down the side. Just like oil and grease stains on the sky.
Now he's still showing damage there in this episode, and the piece of him that flies off is the same one that came off in A New Hope. See, I think that all of this is like a fun background Easter egg, but it's even cooler if it stays in the background. Kind of like how the Fast and Furious stopped being cool whenever it commented on the fact that what they were doing was ridiculous.
We've taken out cars, trains, tanks. I'm not going to even mention the submarine. Maybe we're not so normal.
But I do like how they gave him a personality. That was really solid storytelling. We see that he's afraid to leave. And Peli probably told an outright lie about his war record.
And besides, I got no room for it on the N1.
Nonsense. R5-D4 is as good as a day came back from serving in the rebellion.
So like, I get it, fine. But a new droid still would have been cooler.
Don't be a baby,
she says.
And they're in a free oil bath.
And this is like the oil bath that we saw 3PO getting in A New Hope. But back to the Easter eggs. When Grogu jumps at Peli, she says,
"Who taught you how to leap like a lerman, huh?"
Yeah, how did you learn to do that?
Luke taught him how to do that in a random episode of the Book of Boba Fett.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, weird story structure, but alright, I got you.
Also, at some point, she lost a tooth, which I'm pretty sure we'll learn all about in a Peli comic or a Disney Plus series or something like that, which actually I wouldn't be mad about seeing. When she sees Din, she says,
"Oh, are the Hutts back? You taking on Boba Fett?"
Referring to the season finale of the Book of Boba Fett, where Din and pretty much everybody else fought off the Pike Syndicate. Now, it's interesting that Peli mentions the Hutts coming back instead of the Pikes, probably because the Hutts loomed so large on Tatooine for decades, and we did have those weird Hutt twins just show up and disappear from the Book of Boba Fett. This could be showing that everybody's expecting those Hutts to return, maybe in Season 2?
Sleep lightly,
Den is looking for an IG memory circuit to repair his buddy IG-11, and Peli says,
"Oh, hey, Grandpa. They haven't made those for a while." "Sorry, pal. No chance cubes."
A couple Easter eggs in there. One, chance cubes are basically space dice that we saw in The Phantom Menace.
Just happen to have a chance cube here.
And the IG droids are actually quite old. We saw them in the Darth Maul comic, which was set around the time of The Phantom Menace, and in the Clone Wars movie, which is roughly set 28 years before this episode, depending on what crazy timeline Jon Favreau has set for the show this week. And by the way, is that pit droid carrying a pole like the one they used to prop open the garbage compactor? Is it just me? Am I seeing things here? Because they did use that same pole way back in episode 2. But enough of that, let's talk about Mandalore. Din says,
"It was once green and beautiful, back when the songs were written."
Now, this is because the planet was once very livable before all the civil wars made it into a desert, like we saw in the Clone Wars and in Rebels. When Den is teaching Grogu navigation, he says,
"I grew up there, on that moon, Concordia."
And this actually fills in a lot of his backstory and connects it to the Clone Wars. Concordia is the moon of Mandalore that Death Watch was exiled to. In the flashbacks of his childhood, we see Clone Wars era members of Death Watch save Din from separatist battle droids. And this is probably because the leader of Death Watch, Pre-Vizsla, had made a deal with Count Dooku. If Dooku helped him overthrow Duchess Satine and conquer Mandalore, then Pre-Vizsla agreed to bring Mandalore into the Confederacy of Independent Systems, along with the 1,000 other planets that Mandalore was in charge of. But But Dooku betrayed him and backed out of the agreement.
Yeah, man, Dooku's got a Dooku. That's what he does.
Right? Afterwards, Vizsla fought against the Separatists wherever he could. So I think that what we're seeing in this flashback is the Separatists retaliating against Death Watch and attacking Concordia after Dooku turned on them. And it turns out that Kalevala, the planet of House Kryze, is in the same solar system as Mandalore. I wasn't sure about this because there's actually like 1,000 planets in the Mandalore sector of influence.
This is Kalevala. It's another planet in the Mandalorian system.
During the Clone Wars, Mandalore was the leader of 1,000 independent planets, which is why both sides wanted them to join their cause. Now, we have seen other planets under their influence, like Concord Dawn and Crow Nest and Rebels. But Kalevala being in the same solar system as Mandalore is funny because it means that Bo-Katan never bothered like sending a probe droid over there to test out the air to see if it was actually poison.
Yeah, you know, what's up with that? Was it just like an elevator where like everybody was standing there and nobody wanted to push the button? How come no one tested out the air?
Because Star Wars, I don't know. Din tells Grogu,
A Mandalorian has to understand maps and know their way around.
Now, of course, this comes into play later in the episode, but also it's because the Empire has scattered the people of Mandalore to the stars. This is very similar to the Jewish diaspora following the destruction of their temple in 70 AD, when their people essentially spread out across the world. Now, notice that when the weather messes with Din's instruments, we get a real good look at his dashboard. These letters are written in the Naboo alphabet that we saw in The Phantom Menace.
And those two control the pitch.
You catch on pretty quick.
And they mean ALT and PSI, and then right here, M-Flight. Now, you'll notice that the once desert surface of the planet has now become crystallized like glass.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, remember, the armorer described the weapons the Empire used.
Its entire surface has been crystallized by fusion rays.
So when you strike sand with lightning, it turns to glass.
Look at these. It's what happens to sand when it's struck by lightning.
So I think that's basically what's happened to this entire world. The Empire has turned it to glass, and later we'll see that this glass buried the domed cities of the planet. The bombs have also damaged the planet's electromagnetic field, conveniently disrupting all communications.
Down here, we're completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy.
We also see bomb craters and the wreckage of a few ships. You can see why so many zealots would think that this world is cursed. Din sends R5 in to test the air, saying that's droid work. Droid work is the space equivalent of Charlie work.
Oh my god, I just found a rat's nest, slaughtered about 200 of them.
And then the letters on this map readout read, system ready, and this proximity radar says turbo boost enabled. Because Grogu is worried about R5, Din agrees to go after him.
Pressurize my helmet, seal yourself in your pod.
And I think this is a super cool detail. We've heard this pressurized sound before when Din removes his helmet. Last episode when the kid put on his helmet. And of course, all of this is coming from Darth Vader removing his mask in Return of the Jedi. But the reason all these guys and the stormtroopers wear helmets is because in the original concept art, these helmets were to help them breathe in space. It's why this original Ralph McQuarrie artwork for George Lucas's original Star Wars script, Adventures of the Starkiller, shows the hero, Deke Starkiller, wearing a mask while he's fighting Vader. When R5 scans the air, the Arabesh letter here reads Analyze and RGB. So then Din goes and enters the cave himself, and first he encounters these Alamites. Now, I don't think we've ever seen them in Star Wars before, but Bo-Katan says,
They used to live in the surface wastelands beyond our cities.
So I'm guessing these are the people who are actually native to Mandalore before the humans arrived there. They even have these large side tusks like the Mythosaur. Encountering a secret group of humanoids in an underground ruin is an old sci-fi trope, going all the way back to the Morlocks in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. But it's also seen prominently in films like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Omega Man, and the remake of Omega Man, I Am Legend. And the hero discovering a vast lost civilization will of course remind you of Indiana Jones, or maybe of the films that inspired Indiana Jones like The Secret of the Incas or The Valley of the Kings. So this is a very faithful live-action creation of the domed Mandalorian cities that we saw in the Clone Wars. In the last episode, Bo-Katan told us the name of this city.
Sundari.
So this is the same capital city from the Clone Wars where Satine ruled. So later on, she and Din are walking on the same walkways as Obi-Wan Kenobi. So if you know the full lore of this city, all of this takes on like an added weight that makes it even more tragic. And remember, this entire structure was not underground. It is a domed city that's been covered up by the destruction the Empire brought to this world. We saw this devastation in the flashback scene in the Book of Boba Fett. They enter the mines and tunnels beneath the city, which is also where Ahsoka Tano pursued Darth Maul in the Clone Wars Season 7. Din finds an old Mandalorian helmet that looks like it's been fried and burned, so I'm wondering if this could have been done with the weapon that Sabine Wren designed for the Empire before she joined the rebellion.
What could do this?
A weapon did this. A weapon created by my daughter.
Wait, what are you talking about? What's that mean?
So basically, Sabine Wren built a machine that would essentially disintegrate beskar armor. Now, supposedly she destroyed all the plans and the machine, but it is the only thing we know of that would have done this to beskar. And then we get our villain of the episode, this incredibly badass cyborg scavenger. I love this villain. When I say that I'm tired of Easter eggs like R5, it's because I want to see awesome new stuff like this.
How do you know it's a cyborg and not like just a robot or something?
Well, remember how General Grievous was mostly machines with like just organic eyes and chest organs?
I remember.
Well, Lucas did that to foreshadow how someone could become a cyborg like Anakin does. And we see that with this thing. There's an organic eye, and then all these tubes filled with liquid hooked up to its chest. It's even got a chest plate like our favorite Star Wars cyborg, Darth Vader. This thing is like inside of a giant crab droid shell, almost like one of the Muckracker separatist droids, but like if it was something out of Mad Max Fury Road. The cage it traps Din inside of is also very Fury Road, but it's based on a medieval torture device called a gibbet, which you might remember from the movie Willow. And just like a crab, this thing can leave its shell and go into another droid housing. It's essentially also a cannibal, eventually hooking up all these tubes and siphoning out Din's blood. Again, very much like Mad Max Fury Road. And the distortion in its voice even sounds like the distortion of Grievous's face speaker in Revenge of the Sith. It's just such a cool design, and I really hope that there are more of these things living under Mandalore so we can see more of this. Also, I don't know if you're watching The Last of Us, but it's about Pedro Pascal protecting a young person with a special ability. And in the last episode, that young person had to step up to save his life. And of course, something very similar happens here with Grogu. It's very cool that we got two very similar episodes inside of a week starring the same actor. On the way out, Grogu proves that he's not just a cute baby, he is a Mandalorian. When Grogu returns to Calvella, he's greeted by the same EV service droid from last episode, while Bo-Katan is still sullying on her throne, very much like the one that her sister sat upon when she ruled Mandalore. Also, I pointed this out last week, but the sculpture beside her depicts a Mandalorian fighting with the lightsaber, so this is probably the darksaber's creator, Tarre Vizsla. And we also see the flag of her house, and also of her faction, the Night Owls. So they take her ship, the Gauntlet, which we also first saw in Clone Wars, and she spends a bit of time telling Grogu information that we already know.
This was once a beautiful civilization. My family ruled it all. I knew quite a few Jedi, you know, but there was a time we actually got along quite well.
And she also does a little bit of saving the cat here, making us sympathize with her because she looks out for Grogu.
I know that you're frightened, but I need you to guide me to him.
She finds the Alamites using weapons that we saw in the Clone Wars and Rebels, like her force-filled shield. Remember, all Mandalorian weapons were originally designed to fight Jedi, and you can see why this would be really useful when you're fighting someone with a lightsaber. And then, yes, we get to see Bo-Katan face off with the cyborg. The cyborg seems like it's using an electric staff, like Grievous's Magna Guards used. And this really makes me think that this thing has been here for like a really long time. The technology looks very separatist, and you have all these similarities to Grievous. Maybe this dude has been buried deep underground since the Clone Wars, feeding off the people in the sewers that we saw in Clone Wars Season 7. Bo-Katan, meanwhile, is using the darksaber, which I don't think we've ever seen her use before. Unlike Din, she wields it with a lot of experience and confidence.
Yeah, why was it so heavy for Din and not for her? Is she like super strong?
Alright, I think you're talking about this.
It gets heavier with each move.
And then she tells him,
your body is strong, but your mind is distracted.
And we saw Sabine Wren have similar problems learning to use the darksaber in Rebels.
It's heavier than I thought.
And then Kanan gave her pretty much the same answer.
Energy constantly flows through the crystal. You're not fighting with a simple blade as much as you are directing a current of power. Your thoughts, your actions, they become energy.
So to take this back to Bo-Katan, she has no doubts, no distractions, and is singularly focused on her survival. She also knows what she wants to do, how to focus this energy. She wants to rule Mandalore, which means that she's better at wielding the blade. She eviscerates this robot in a way that's very reminiscent of Samurai Jack. Now, ordinarily, I would say that's just a coincidence, but Jon Favreau's going on the record saying he was a big fan of that show, even asking the creator of Samurai Jack to draw the storyboards for Iron Man 2.
Gendy's very much into, if you look at Samurai Jack, it's just like building on top of the ridiculous.
Then we get this conversation with Din and Bo-Katan, which is loaded with subtext. Remember, Din has already heard the story of Bo-Katan from the leader of his culvert.
She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess. If, however, it is not won in combat and falls into the hands of the undeserving, it will be a curse unto the nation.
So he believes that Bo-Katan is basically the reason their world was destroyed. But while she resents Din having the darksaber, she's really given up on her people. While Din places all of his faith in his creed.
Without the creed, what are we? What do we stand for? Our people are scattered like stars in the galaxy. The creed is how we survived.
Bo-Katan then fills us in on some Mandalorian culture. Apparently, the vow the kid was taking in the first episode is a vow that many Mandalorians would take.
I was part of the royal family. I took the creed and was showered with gifts.
But for more modern Mandalorians like her, this oath was largely ceremonial.
Safe in the braid of the old ways.
This is the way. Bo-Katan says,
they loved watching the princess recite the Mandalorian tenets as her father looked on proudly.
And this is interesting because remember, Bo-Katan did break up with her family. Her sister was leader of the pacifists while she ran off to join Death Watch, the violent Mandalorians. We never got to see much of this sibling conflict in the Clone Wars, so it might be good to see a Clone Wars era flashback. And if they do that, there's only one person who should play Satine in live action.
Oh, who's that?
Nicole Kidman.
Oh, because she played Satine in Moulin Rouge, and Ewan McGregor fell in love with her and Duchess Satine. Yeah, that'd be cool. High five.
High five. So, Bo-Katan says her father died in battle, and Din pays a really touching tribute to him.
This is the way.
That is just some great helmet acting. And then there's a plaque at the entrance to the mine written in Mandoa, the ancient language of the Mandalorians, and thank God she translates it for us.
According to ancient folklore, the mines were once a mythosaur lair. Mandalore the Great is said to have tamed the mythical beast.
So this is where she's talking about the first leader to unite the planet, the Mandalore, with an apostrophe in the middle. Remember, the armorer talked about this prophecy of the beast coming back from the waters to reclaim their world. Now when they see the water, Bo-Katan expects Din to be disappointed, and so do we. And then he just wordlessly takes off his gear, and man, this is moving. Then he repeats the same vow that he took as a child.
I swear on my name.
I swear on my name.
And the names of the ancestors.
And the names of the ancestors.
That I shall walk the way of the Mandalore.
That I shall walk the way of the Mandalore.
And you can see this on Bo-Katan's face. There's something electrifying or even empowering about this baptism. And then he's pulled under. So let's take just a moment to speak about the Christian custom of baptism. Last week, I made a mistake when I said that Baptists believe you have to be baptized to enter heaven and the Methodists believe the opposite. I actually got that very backwards. I'm really sorry about that. So baptisms are a metaphor for cleaning yourself of your sins and then being reborn into a new life. There's also an element of danger in a baptism. Water can make you clean, but it can also make you drown. And the way a lot of preachers baptize by holding someone and dipping them backwards is really scary. I mean, people place themselves in a very vulnerable position, which of course requires them to have faith. Now the Mandalorians call these the living waters, which is taken from John 7. Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. In the case of the Bible, the living waters refer to the Spirit of God. In The Mandalorian, they refer to the power of the Mandalore. Bo-Katan believed that all of this was a myth until we see that the Mythosaur is still indeed living beneath these waters. So we understand that these waters are living because there is a living creature beneath them. It's a way of saying that the entire people of Mandalore, their spirit, is still alive. And more importantly, Bo-Katan sees the Mythosaur. Notice she even lets out a gasp of air bubbles. So now, given how moved she was by Din's baptism, is she going to become a true believer? Or will she just use the Mythosaur as an excuse to rise to power? Maybe we'll look back on this episode as the last time these two fought on the same side, and we could have just witnessed the start of the final Mandalorian Civil War. And just a reminder, everybody, to take the hassle out of eating healthy, give Factor a try. Head to Factor75.com and use my promo code ScreenCrush50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. But we want to hear from all of you about The Mandalorian. What did you think about the episode? Let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.